The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Victoria Manning's heels clicked against the polished hospital floor. The antiseptic smell mixed with the metallic scent of blood, and somewhere behind her, monitors beeped with urgent rhythm. "Ma'am, you need to make a decision. We can only treat one patient at a time in the trauma bay." Victoria stood frozen between two gurneys in St. Mary's emergency room. On her left lay her millionaire ex-husband, Richard Manning, 50 years old, unconscious from a suspected heart attack. His face was pale beneath the oxygen mask, his graying hair disheveled. 24 years of marriage, and she had never seen him look so vulnerable. On her right, Amber Chin, 28 and 7 months pregnant, pressed a blood-soaked towel to her forehead. The head wound had come from their collision in the parking lot, when emotions and pregnancy hormones had overwhelmed the younger woman's usual composure. "He chose me, not you," Amber whispered, her voice weak but defiant. Even injured, she clutched her swollen belly protectively. Dr. Martinez, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and steady hands, looked between the two patients and back to Victoria. "Mrs. Manning, time is critical for both of them. As your husband's next of kin, you have the authority to make medical decisions. But this young woman and her baby are also at risk." Victoria's mind raced. 3 days ago, she had discovered Richard's affair. 2 days ago, she had filed for divorce. Tonight, she had come to the hospital only because Amber had called her, crying and alone, when Richard collapsed at his office. "I need a moment to think," Victoria said, her voice measured and precise, the same tone that had once commanded courtrooms before she gave up her law career to support Richard's tech company. The emergency room buzzed around them. A child cried somewhere in the distance. A television mounted on the wall played the evening news with the sound turned down. Victoria caught a glimpse of the stock ticker scrolling across the bottom of the screen and wondered absently how Richard's company's shares were performing. "Ma'am," Dr. Martinez said gently, "I understand this is complicated, but we really need to move quickly." Victoria looked down at Richard's unconscious form. His smartphone had fallen from his pocket and lay cracked on the gurney beside him. How many nights had she watched him type on that phone, believing he was answering work emails when he was really messaging Amber? How many business trips had been lies? How many times had he said, "I love you," to her while planning a future with someone else? 24 years of marriage? Victoria murmured, more to herself than to anyone else. And it comes down to this moment. Amber's breathing was shallow, and Victoria noticed how young she looked with her eyes closed, her dark hair matted with blood. The pregnancy had rounded her face, making her appear even more vulnerable. She wasn't a villain, Victoria realized. She was just another woman who had believed Richard's promises. Who deserves to live more? Victoria thought. The question felt impossible, cruel in its simplicity. The monitors continued their electronic chorus. Dr. Martinez checked her watch. Somewhere in the hospital, other families were having the best or worst nights of their lives. And here, in Trauma Bay 3, Victoria Manning faced a choice that would define not just this moment, but everything that came after. "Mrs. Manning," Dr. Martinez prompted. Victoria closed her eyes and made her decision. 12 hours earlier. Victoria's biggest worry was whether the caterer would deliver on time. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Manning estate in Westchester, casting geometric patterns across the marble kitchen island. Victoria stood at the center of it all, clipboard in hand, orchestrating Richard's 50th birthday party with the precision of a military operation. "Honey, you've outdone yourself," Grace said, bursting through the back door with her characteristic energy. Victoria's younger sister moved like she was perpetually late for something important, which she usually was. "This place looks like something out of Architectural Digest. The flowers better look perfect for what I'm paying," Victoria replied, adjusting a vase of white orchids on the kitchen counter. "Maria, did the caterers confirm the 7 o'clock arrival time?" "Si, Signora Victoria. They will be here at 7 exactly," Maria answered in her gentle accent. The housekeeper had worked for the Mannings for 15 years. arriving each morning at 8 and staying until the kitchen was spotless. Her loyalty was unwavering, even when Richard barely acknowledged her presence. Victoria surveyed her domain. The kitchen sparkled. The formal dining room was set for 60 guests, and the backyard was transformed into an elegant party space, complete with a jazz quartet stage and strategically placed lighting. Every detail reflected 2 decades of entertaining Richard's business associates, tech industry contacts, and the social circle that came with their millionaire status. "Where is the birthday boy?" Grace asked, helping herself to coffee from the expensive Italian machine. "In his study, doing whatever it is he does on that computer all day," Victoria said. She had stopped asking about Richard's work years ago. His tech company had gone public for $200 million, making their divorce settlement potentially worth tens of millions. But the details of artificial intelligence development and venture capital funding bored her to tears. Richard appeared in the doorway as if summoned, already dressed in his signature black t-shirt and expensive jeans. At 50, he maintained the casual uniform of Silicon Valley executives, though his hairline had receded and his middle had thickened despite the personal trainer. "Whatever you think is best, Vic," he said absently, thumbs moving across his phone screen. "The party looks great. I haven't even shown you the final setup yet," Victoria pointed out. "I trust your judgment. You always nail these things." He kissed her forehead without looking up from his phone, the same perfunctory gesture he had performed for years. "I've got some calls to make before people arrive." Grace raised her eyebrows as Richard disappeared back toward his study. That man would forget his own birthday if you didn't organize it for him. "He's busy," Victoria said automatically, the same excuse she had been making for years. "The company is expanding into new markets." But as she returned to her preparations, Victoria caught her reflection in the granite countertop and paused. When had she become someone who measured success by how well she threw parties? When did she stop being the woman who argued cases in front of judges? When did her identity become so completely tied to being Richard Manning's wife? The caterers arrived precisely at 7, filling the kitchen with the organized chaos of professional party preparation. Victoria directed traffic, ensured the bar was properly stocked, and confirmed that the jazz quartet had everything they needed. By 7:30, the first guests were arriving, and her beautiful party was officially underway. "You're incredible," Tom Bradley said, Richard's business partner and longest friend. Tom was one of those naturally jovial men who seemed to find everything amusing. "Dick's the luckiest man alive with you. Victoria, I keep telling my wife she should take lessons from you." Victoria smiled and accepted the compliment, as she had thousands of times before. She moved through the party like a professional hostess, ensuring glasses stayed full and conversations flowed smoothly. The jazz quartet played standards from the 40s and 50s, and the caterers circulated with perfectly prepared appetizers. Everything was flawless, exactly as she had planned. Richard worked the crowd with the easy charm that had made him successful in business. He talked about quarterly projections and market disruption, his favorite topics, while Victoria ensured his guests were comfortable and entertained. They moved through the party like dance partners, each playing their role in the performance of a successful marriage. 24 years, she overheard Richard telling a group of tech executives. "Victoria's been putting up with me for 24 years. I don't know how she does it." The comment was meant to be charming, self-deprecating, but something about it struck Victoria as strange. Not because it was untrue, but because it reduced their entire relationship to her tolerance of his flaws. When had their marriage become something she simply endured? As the evening progressed, Victoria found herself watching Richard more carefully. He seemed distracted, checking his phone frequently despite being surrounded by important guests. When the jazz quartet took a break, she noticed him step away from the crowd to take a call near the pool house. "Baby, I can't talk now," she heard him say, his voice low but carrying in the still night air. "Yes, I'll see you tomorrow." "I love you too." Victoria's blood turned cold. She stood frozen by the French doors, holding a tray of champagne glasses, trying to process what she had just heard. 24 years of marriage, and Richard was telling someone else he loved them. What's wrong? Grace appeared at her elbow, her sister's intuition picking up on Victoria's distress. You look like you've seen a ghost. I think I have, Victoria whispered. The party continued outside, jazz music and laughter echoing across the perfectly manicured lawn. But Victoria felt disconnected from her own celebration. She moved through the motions of hostessing, her mind replaying Richard's phone conversation. Baby, I love you too. The words echoed in her head as she smiled at guests and refreshed drinks. By 10:30, the last guests had departed, showering Victoria with compliments about the evening's success. Tom Bradley was the final to leave, slightly drunk and effusive in his praise. Best party of the year. Victoria, you should go into event planning professionally. He kissed her cheek and stumbled toward his Uber. Dick, you lucky bastard, don't mess this up. Don't mess this up. If only Tom knew how prophetic his words were. Richard had disappeared into the house 20 minutes earlier, claiming he needed to check email. Victoria found Maria directing the caterer's cleanup and told her to leave the rest for morning. The housekeeper looked surprised. Victoria never left task unfinished but gathered her coat and purse without comment. The house felt cavernous with just the two of them. Victoria's heels clicked on the marble floor as she made her way to Richard's study, each step measured and deliberate. The door was slightly ajar, and she could see the blue glow of his computer screen. Richard. She pushed the door open and found him hunched over his laptop, typing intently. The party's over. Just finishing up some emails, he said without looking up. Great party. Vic. Really great. Who were you talking to earlier? During the party. His fingers hesitated over the keyboard. Just business. You know how it is. Business that says I love you too at the end. Richard's hands stilled completely. The silence stretched between them, filled only by the distant hum of the refrigerator and the grandfather clock in the hallway. When he finally turned around, his face was carefully neutral, the expression he wore during difficult business negotiations. Victoria, let's not do this tonight. We just had a beautiful party. Answer the question. Her voice carried the authority she had once used in courtrooms, a tone that brooked no argument. Who were you talking to? Richard stood up, closing the laptop with a deliberate click. It's complicated. Complicated how? Victoria stepped into the study, noting absently that Richard had removed most of their family photos from his desk over the past few months. When had that happened? How many other changes had she missed while busy being the perfect wife? There's someone else, Richard said finally. It's not what you think. What I think is that my husband of 24 years is having an affair. Victoria's voice remained steady, though her heart was racing. What I think is that you just threw your 50th birthday party while planning to leave me for another woman. Richard ran his hands through his hair, a gesture she recognized from their early dating years when he was nervous. Victoria, I never meant for this to happen. I love you. You love me. Victoria laughed, the sound sharp and bitter. You love me, and you love her. Is that supposed to make me feel better? It's not that simple. It's exactly that simple. Richard, you made a choice. You've been making choices for months, haven't you? Maybe years. She moved toward his desk, noting how quickly he positioned himself between her and the computer. What's on there that you don't want me to see, monitored Victoria? She stepped around him and opened the laptop before he could stop her. The screen displayed a messaging app with a conversation thread labeled A. Chen. Victoria's eyes scanned the messages, each line a small knife thrust. Missing you tonight during the party. I wish I could be there with you. Only thinking about you and our future together. Victoria scrolled up, finding weeks of intimate messages, photos she didn't examine too closely, and practical discussions about apartment leases and baby preparations. Baby preparations. She's pregnant, Victoria said, her voice hollow with shock. Victoria, let me explain. She's pregnant. Victoria found the ultrasound image, dated 3 weeks ago. How long has this been going on? 2 years. Richard said quietly. Maybe a little longer. 2 years. Victoria's mind calculated backward, remembering business trips and late nights at the office, weekend conferences and networking events, all lies, all opportunities to build a life with someone else while she organized his social calendar and played the perfect wife. Who is she? Victoria asked, though she dreaded the answer. Amber Chen. She works at the company in AI development. How old? 28. 28. Young enough to be their daughter. If they had been able to have children, another dream sacrificed for Richard's career, another compromise made in the name of their partnership. Victoria closed the laptop and turned to face her husband. He looked older suddenly, the weight of his deception visible in the lines around his eyes and the slump of his shoulders. I gave you the best years of my life, she said quietly. I gave up my law career to support your business. I hosted your clients, managed your social life, played the perfect corporate wife. I made your success possible. I know, Richard said. I know, and I'm grateful. Don't. Victoria held up her hand. Don't you dare say you're grateful while you're leaving me for a pregnant 28-year-old. Victoria, I never meant for this to happen. I love you both. You can't love us both. Richard, that's not how love works. That's not how marriage works. That's not how anything works. The study fell silent except for the tick of the grandfather clock. Victoria looked around the room at the awards and accolades. The photos of Richard with tech industry luminaries. The symbols of the success they had built together. Success that was about to be divided in a divorce settlement worth millions of dollars. What happens now? Richard asked. Now you pack a bag, Victoria said. Now you decide who you want to be. Now I call a lawyer and figure out what 24 years of marriage is worth in today's market. She walked toward the door, her heels clicking with finality on the hardwood floor. Victoria, wait. She paused in the doorway without turning around. For what, Richard? For you to explain how you accidentally fell in love with someone else. For you to tell me how this isn't what you wanted. For you to make me feel guilty for not understanding your needs. I don't know, he said. I just don't want it to end like this. It already ended, Victoria said. Probably 2 years ago, when you decided to build a life with someone else. I'm just catching up. 3 days later, Victoria did something she never imagined she would do. She drove into Manhattan to meet her husband's pregnant mistress. The coffee shop in Soho was the kind of trendy place Victoria usually avoided: exposed brick walls, mismatched furniture, and indie music playing just a little too loudly. But Amber Chen had suggested it, and Victoria was curious to see what kind of environment the other woman preferred. She arrived 15 minutes early and chose a table near the window, ordering a latte she didn't want and watching pedestrians hurry past on the sidewalk. The morning rush had ended, leaving the streets to tourists and people who worked flexible schedules. People like Amber, presumably, who could meet for coffee at 10:30 on a Wednesday morning. Victoria recognized her immediately when she walked in. Amber Chen was petite, even at 7 months pregnant, with long black hair and the kind of effortless style that came from having good bone structure and unlimited access to online shopping. She looked exactly like what she was: a successful young woman in tech, comfortable in expensive jeans and designer sneakers. Victoria, Amber approached the table hesitantly. Thank you for meeting me. Sit down, Victoria said, gesturing to the chair across from her. You look like you need to get off your feet. Amber settled herself carefully, one hand resting on her rounded belly. Up close, she was even younger looking than Victoria had expected, with clear skin and bright eyes that spoke of good health and optimism. She ordered a decaf cappuccino and looked nervously across the table. I wondered when you'd want to meet me, Amber said finally. You're having my husband's baby, Victoria replied matter-of-factly. It seemed like something we should discuss. He told me the marriage was over, Amber said quickly. He said you two were just staying together for appearances, for business reasons. Victoria sipped her latte and studied the younger woman's face. Did he tell you we were still sharing a bed 3 months ago? Amber's expression shifted. confusion replacing defensiveness. What? Did he tell you that I was planning his 50th birthday party while he was texting you during the evening? Did he mention that I've been handling his social calendar, organizing his business entertaining, playing the devoted wife right up until the moment I found out about you? No, Amber whispered. He said, he said you had an arrangement, that you were more like business partners than husband and wife. Victoria almost smiled at the familiar pattern. Let me guess. He told you I was cold, focused on money and status, that I didn't understand his creative vision or support his emotional needs? Something like that, Amber admitted, looking increasingly uncomfortable. The oldest story in the book, Victoria said. The misunderstood husband, the frigid wife, the young woman who sees his true potential. How original. Amber's eyes flashed with anger. It wasn't like that. We have a real connection. We work together every day. I see how brilliant he is, how passionate about the technology. I helped him build that company, Victoria interrupted. I gave up my law career to support his vision. I spent 20 years networking with investors, hosting potential clients, managing his professional relationships. That brilliant, passionate man you fell in love with, I made him possible. The espresso machine hissed in the background, and indie music continued its relentless cheerfulness. Amber stared down at her hands, and Victoria noticed she wasn't wearing an engagement ring. He didn't tell you any of that, did he? Victoria asked more gently. No, Amber said. He made it sound like you were holding him back, like you didn't care about the work, only the money it generated. Victoria felt a familiar pang of recognition. How many women had sat across from each other like this, realizing they had both been lied to? How many times had a man's selfishness put two innocent people in an impossible situation? Tell me about yourself, Victoria said. Not about Richard, about you. Amber looked surprised by the request. I have a master's degree in computer science from Stanford. I've been working in AI development for 5 years. I love the work, the problem solving, the innovation. I thought Richard and I were building something together, both professionally and personally. And the pregnancy wasn't planned, but I'm happy about it. I've always wanted children, and I'm in a good place financially to support a baby. Amber paused. Or I was, before all this happened. What do you mean Richard's been distant since you found out? He says he needs time to think, to figure out what he wants. I'm starting to wonder if he ever really wanted to leave his marriage, or if I was just something exciting on the side. Victoria studied the young woman across from her. Amber was intelligent, accomplished, and genuinely in love with Richard. She was also 7 months pregnant and facing the possibility that the father of her child might abandon her for the wife he had claimed not to love. How much do you know about our financial situation? Victoria asked. Richard said you have a lot of money tied up in investments in real estate. He seemed worried about how much a divorce would cost. Our net worth is approximately $50 million, Victoria said bluntly. Richard's company is valued at $400 million. I'm entitled to half of everything we built together over 24 years of marriage. Amber's eyes widened. I had no idea. Of course you didn't. Richard doesn't discuss money with people unless it serves his interests. Victoria leaned forward. What has he promised you about your future together? He said we'd get a place together after the baby comes. That he wanted to be a family? Amber's voice grew smaller. But that was before you found out. Now I don't know what he wants. Victoria felt an unexpected surge of sympathy for the younger woman. Amber wasn't a calculating gold digger or a homewrecker. She was just another person who had believed Richard's version of reality without knowing all the facts. What are we going to do? Amber asked, her voice barely audible above the coffee shop noise. Victoria looked at this young woman, pregnant and alone, facing an uncertain future with a man who specialized in making promises he might not keep. I don't know, Victoria said honestly, but we both deserve better than this. You deserve a man who chooses you completely, not someone who keeps you as a secret for 2 years. And your baby deserves a father who's proud to claim them. Amber's eyes filled with tears. I'm scared. You should be, Victoria said. But not of me. I'm not your enemy. Amber, we're both victims of the same man's selfishness. They sat in silence for a moment, two women connected by their shared experience of loving Richard Manning and discovering he wasn't the man either of them thought he was. What happens next? Amber asked. Next, you decide what kind of life you want for yourself and your baby. Next, I figure out how to be someone other than Richard Manning's wife. Next, we both learn how to move forward. Victoria stood up, leaving money on the table for both their drinks. Take care of yourself, Amber, and don't let Richard convince you that you're asking for too much when you ask him to choose. That evening, Victoria returned home to find Richard packing a suitcase in their master bedroom. He moved methodically through the walk-in closet, selecting shirts and pants with the same careful consideration he applied to business decisions. The sight of him dividing their shared life into portable pieces struck her as profoundly sad and utterly predictable. Going somewhere? Victoria asked from the doorway. Richard looked up from folding a sweater she had given him for their 20th anniversary. I think it's best if I stay somewhere else for a while, until we figure things out. Figure what out? Exactly. Victoria set down her purse and car keys on the dresser they had shared for 15 years. You have a pregnant girlfriend and a wife who's filing for divorce. What's left to figure out? Don't make this harder than it has to be. Vic, I'm not making anything hard. Richard, I'm asking a simple question. What exactly needs to be figured out? Richard zipped the suitcase and set it on the floor. I need space to think. This whole situation has gotten out of control. Situation? Victoria repeated the word with dark amusement. Is that what we're calling your 2-year affair and secret pregnancy now? You don't understand the pressure I'm under, Richard said, running his hands through his hair in the nervous gesture she knew so well. The company is in a critical growth phase. The board is breathing down my neck about quarterly projections. Amber's pregnancy wasn't planned. You finding out wasn't planned. I need time to process everything. Victoria sat down in the chair by the window, the same spot where she had read countless books while Richard worked late in his study. So you're choosing her. I'm not choosing anyone. I'm trying to make the best decisions for everyone involved. She's pregnant with your child. Richard, there's no thinking left to do. Either you want to be a father to that baby, or you don't. Either you want to build a life with Amber, or you don't. It's not that simple. It's exactly that simple. Victoria's voice remained calm, though she felt anything but peaceful inside. You've been making choices for 2 years. You chose to start an affair. You chose to continue it. You chose to get another woman pregnant. You chose to lie to me about business trips and late nights at the office. The only thing left to choose is what you're going to do now that you've been caught. Richard moved to the dresser and began collecting his watch, wallet, and other personal items. The mundane domesticity of the moment struck Victoria as absurd. They were ending a 24-year marriage, and he was worried about forgetting his cufflinks. I've been talking to lawyers, Richard said without looking at her. So have I. Victoria, I want this to be amicable. For both our sakes, amicable. Victoria stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the backyard where they had hosted Richard's birthday party just 3 days ago. The rental company had removed the tent and staging, leaving only slightly flattened grass as evidence of the celebration. You've been stealing money from our joint accounts for 6 months. Richard, I had my lawyer run a complete financial analysis. Richard's hand stilled on his phone charger. What are you talking about? The apartment lease for Amber, the medical bills for her pregnancy care, the savings account you opened without my knowledge, the investments you moved into your individual name. Did you think I wouldn't notice? Did you think I was too stupid to track our finances? I was trying to protect you. From what? From knowing how much our divorce settlement is going to cost you. Victoria turned to face him. 24 years of marriage. Richard, half of everything we built together. That includes the house, the investment portfolio, the business assets, and the company shares. My lawyer estimates my share at approximately $25 million. Here, Richard sat down heavily on the edge of the bed they had shared for over 2 decades. Victoria, please, we can work something out. We don't have to destroy each other financially. I'm not destroying anything. I'm claiming what's legally mine after a quarter century of marriage. Victoria's voice remained steady, professional. The prenup we signed 24 years ago is worthless now. Too much has changed. Too much money has been earned during our marriage for it to hold up in court. The company, half of it is mine. I supported your vision when you were working 18-hour days in a garage. I networked with investors when you were too shy to pitch your ideas. I hosted the dinner parties that landed your first major contracts. That company exists because of both of us, not just you. Richard looked up at her with an expression she had never seen before, genuine fear. Not fear of losing her, but fear of losing his wealth, his status, his comfortable life. What do you want from me? He asked. I want you to pack your bags and go live your new life, Victoria said. I want you to stop pretending this is complicated when it's actually very simple. I want you to be honest with Amber about what you're choosing and what you're giving up. And if I choose you, Victoria almost laughed at the question. You can't choose me, Richard. That choice expired when you decided to build a secret life with someone else. You can't unring that bell. Richard stood up and pulled his suitcase toward the door. I never wanted to hurt you, but you did hurt me. You hurt me every day for 2 years while you lied to my face and planned your exit strategy. Victoria followed him to the bedroom door. The difference is, I'm going to recover. I'm going to be fine. Better than fine. Actually, Victoria, go. Richard, go be with your pregnant girlfriend. Go figure out how to be a father at 50. Go live whatever fantasy you've been constructing for the past 2 years. Richard paused at the top of the stairs. What if I made a mistake? What if I want to try to fix this? Victoria looked at her husband, soon-to-be ex-husband, and felt something she hadn't expected. Not anger or sadness, but relief. Pure, clean relief that the pretense was finally over. Some mistakes can't be fixed, she said. Some choices can't be unmade. You chose Amber and your new life 2 years ago. I'm just catching up to your decision. Richard walked down the stairs, his footsteps echoing in the marble foyer. Victoria heard the front door open and close, then the sound of his car starting in the driveway. She stood at the bedroom window and watched his taillights disappear down their street, taking with them 2 decades of shared history and the illusion of their perfect marriage. Then she walked downstairs to the kitchen and called Grace. He's gone, Victoria said when her sister answered. And I think I'm relieved. Victoria hadn't practiced law in 20 years, but she still knew how to fight. Sarah Peterson's office occupied a corner of a glass tower in downtown Manhattan, with views of the harbor and enough awards on the walls to establish her credentials as one of the city's top divorce attorneys. She had been Victoria's roommate at Columbia Law School, back when they were both young women determined to change the world through legal advocacy. Victoria Manning, Sarah said, standing up from behind an imposing mahogany desk. I wondered when I'd hear from you. You saw the news about Richard's company going public. I saw the news about Richard Manning's net worth hitting $400 million. I also heard rumors about a young employee. Sarah gestured to a chair across from her desk. Tell me everything. Victoria settled into the leather chair and organized her thoughts the way she had been trained to do decades ago. Present the facts clearly. Identify the legal issues. Develop a strategy for success. His name is Richard Manning. We've been married 24 years. No children. His tech company went public 18 months ago, making our personal net worth approximately $50 million. He's been having an affair for 2 years with a 28-year-old employee named Amber Chen, who is currently 7 months pregnant with his child. Sarah took notes on a legal pad, her handwriting as neat and precise as Victoria remembered from law school. Assets. Primary residence in Westchester valued at $8 million. Investment portfolio worth $32 million. Richard's company shares valued at approximately $12 million. Various smaller accounts and assets? Victoria paused. He's been moving money without my knowledge for 6 months. Of course he has. Sarah's expression was grimly amused. Tech millionaire, pregnant mistress, long marriage. This is going to get ugly. Victoria, the media will have a field day. I don't care about the media. I care about what's fair. Fair and legal are two different things. Let's focus on legal. Sarah leaned back in her chair. The good news is that 24 years of marriage gives you significant claim to marital assets. The bad news is that Richard's been planning this longer than you realized. Sarah opened a file folder and spread several documents across her desk. I've been monitoring Richard's financial activities since the company went public. Call it professional curiosity about how tech executives handle their wealth. Victoria leaned forward to examine the papers. Bank statements, investment transfers, property records, business filings, the documentary evidence of Richard's systematic preparation for divorce. He's been working with Morrison, Sterling and Associates for 8 months. Sarah continued. They specialize in protecting high-net-worth individuals during divorce proceedings. Richard's been very careful about moving assets into protected categories. Protected how? Business reinvestment, executive compensation packages, offshore holdings, legal ways to reduce the apparent value of marital assets. Sarah pointed to a bank statement. But he made mistakes. The apartment lease for Amber Chen, the medical expenses for her pregnancy care, the savings account he thought you wouldn't notice. Victoria studied the evidence of Richard's deception, feeling oddly detached from the betrayal it represented. Numbers on paper, legal strategies, financial maneuvering. It was easier to focus on the mechanics of divorce than the emotional reality of a failed marriage. What's our strategy? Victoria asked. Aggressive but fair. We demand half of everything accumulated during the marriage, including business assets. We document his affair and the financial resources he's devoted to supporting his mistress. We make it clear that any attempt to hide assets will result in maximum penalties under New York law. Timeline: 6 months if he's reasonable, 18 months if he wants to fight. Sarah closed the file folder. Victoria, I have to ask, are you sure you want to go through with this? Divorce from a millionaire ex-husband is going to be expensive, time-consuming, and emotionally brutal. As opposed to staying married to a man who's been lying to me for 2 years while building a life with someone else? Victoria almost smiled. I think I'll take my chances with divorce. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at the screen and frowned. That's odd. I just got a message from someone claiming to be Amber Chen. She wants to meet with me. About what? She says Richard collapsed at his office this morning and is in the hospital. She's asking if I know how to reach you. Victoria felt the blood drain from her face. What hospital? St. Mary's in Manhattan. Sarah was already reaching for her coat. Do you want me to drive you? No, I can drive myself. Victoria stood up, her mind racing. If Richard is seriously ill, what happens to the divorce proceedings? If he's incapacitated, they get more complicated. But Victoria, you don't have to go to the hospital. You're not responsible for his medical care anymore. Victoria paused at the office door. I know I'm not responsible for him, but I am responsible for myself, and I need to be able to live with whatever happens next. She was halfway to the elevator when her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Mrs. Manning, this is Amber. Something's wrong. Richard collapsed at work and won't wake up. We're at St. Mary's Hospital. I don't know who else to call. Victoria stared at the message, thinking about the young woman she had met in the coffee shop just 3 days ago. Amber was alone, pregnant, and scared, calling the woman whose husband she had been sleeping with because she had no one else to turn to. The man who had betrayed her, who had left her for another woman, who had spent 2 years planning his escape from their marriage, might be dying, and the woman carrying his child was reaching out to Victoria for help. I have to go, Victoria said to herself, pushing the elevator button. Whatever he's done, I can't let him die alone. Victoria arrived at St. Mary's Hospital to find chaos in the emergency room. Friday evening brought the usual mix of medical emergencies, crying children, elderly patients, young adults with sports injuries, and the general atmosphere of controlled urgency that characterized urban hospitals after dark. She found Amber in the waiting area, 7 months pregnant and visibly distraught. The younger woman looked fragile in oversized scrubs, probably borrowed from a nurse, with her dark hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. When she saw Victoria, relief flooded her face. "Thank God you came," Amber said, struggling to stand from the uncomfortable plastic chair. "I didn't know who else to call." "What happened?" Victoria asked, noting the exhaustion in Amber's voice and the dark circles under her eyes. "He was at the office, working late on a new product launch. I was there too. We often work late together." Amber's words came in a rush. "He was talking to investors on a video call, and suddenly he just stopped talking. He grabbed his chest and collapsed. The paramedics said it looked like a heart attack." Victoria looked around the waiting room, searching for familiar faces. "Has anyone called his parents? His brother?" "I only have your number," Amber admitted. "He talks about you all the time, even after everything that's happened. He gave me your contact information months ago, in case of emergency." Even after everything, Victoria wondered what stories Richard had been telling Amber about their marriage, their divorce, their shared history. But this wasn't the time for those conversations. "Have the doctors said anything about his condition?" "They're running tests, something about blocked arteries and blood flow to the heart." Amber sat back down heavily, one hand resting on her swollen belly. "I'm scared, Victoria. I know I have no right to be here, no right to call you, but I didn't know what else to do." Victoria studied the young woman who was carrying her husband's child. Despite everything, the affair, the lies, the betrayal, Amber looked genuinely frightened and alone. She wasn't a villain or a homewrecker. She was just another person who loved Richard Manning and was now facing the possibility of losing him. "You have every right to be here," Victoria said quietly. "You're the mother of his child." Dr. Martinez appeared in the waiting area, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and the calm authority that came from years of delivering difficult news to anxious families. "Are you Mrs. Manning?" she asked Victoria. "Yes. How is my husband?" "He's stable for now, but his condition is serious. He's had what we call a massive myocardial infarction, a severe heart attack. We need to perform emergency surgery to clear the blocked arteries." "What are his chances?" Amber asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Martinez looked between the two women, clearly noting the unusual family dynamic but maintaining professional discretion. "With immediate surgery, his chances are good. Without it, he won't survive the night." "Then do the surgery," Victoria said immediately. "There's one complication." Dr. Martinez continued. "We're short-staffed tonight due to a multi-car accident that came in an hour ago. Our cardiac surgery team is already in use. We can either operate on your husband immediately with our backup team or wait 2 hours for our primary surgeon to become available." Victoria was about to respond when Amber suddenly doubled over, clutching her stomach with both hands. "Something's wrong," Amber gasped. The baby. Dr. Martinez immediately knelt beside Amber's chair, checking her pulse and examining her eyes. "How long have you been having contractions?" "They started an hour ago, but I thought it was just stress." "Oh God, it hurts." Amber tried to stand up but stumbled forward, her head connecting with Victoria's shoulder as she fell. Both women went down in a tangle of limbs, Amber crying out in pain as her head struck the floor. "I need a wheelchair and a gurney in here now." Dr. Martinez called out, and suddenly the waiting area filled with medical staff. Victoria found herself sitting on the floor with blood on her shirt, whether hers or Amber's. She couldn't tell. "Ma'am, are you injured?" A nurse was examining Victoria's forehead, where Amber's head had connected during their collision. "I'm fine," Victoria said, though she could feel a throbbing where skin had been scraped. "Take care of her. Take care of the baby." 2 gurneys appeared, and medical staff efficiently transferred both women for examination. Victoria found herself on one stretcher, While Amber was rushed toward the maternity wing, nurses calling out medical terms Victoria didn't understand. Dr. Martinez appeared beside Victoria's gurney, looking grim. Mrs. Manning, I need you to make a decision. Your husband needs immediate surgery. Ms. Chen has a serious head injury and is showing signs of premature labor. We're critically short-staffed, and I can only assign our available team to one emergency at a time. Victoria looked around the emergency room, taking in the controlled chaos of medical professionals trying to save lives with limited resources. Down the hall, she could see Amber being wheeled into a treatment room, medical staff surrounding her gurney. Ma'am, you're your husband's next of kin, Dr. Martinez continued. You have the legal authority to make medical decisions, but time is critical for both patients. Victoria closed her eyes and thought about the choice in front of her. Richard, unconscious and dying from a heart attack. The man who had shared her life for 24 years before betraying her trust. Amber, young and pregnant and bleeding from a head wound. The woman who had believed Richard's lies about their marriage. Choose quickly, Mrs. Manning, Dr. Martinez said gently. Lives are at stake. Victoria opened her eyes and looked down the hospital corridor toward the trauma bay where Richard lay unconscious. Then she looked toward the maternity wing where Amber was fighting for her life and the life of her unborn child. In that moment, Victoria Manning made the choice that would define the rest of her life. Take care of Amber first, Victoria said without hesitation. The baby needs her. Dr. Martinez looked surprised. Ma'am, are you certain your husband's condition is critical? I'm certain, Victoria replied, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. Save the baby. Save the mother. Amber, semi-conscious on the gurney, turned her head toward Victoria. Why, she whispered, after everything we've done to you. Victoria looked at this young woman, pregnant and bleeding, facing the possibility of losing her child while the father lay unconscious down the hall. Because it's the right thing to do. Because that baby is innocent. Because you're both innocent. Dr. Martinez nodded and began barking orders to the medical team. Take Ms. Chen to OR3. Get Dr. Kim from maternity and Dr. Roberts from neurology. This patient takes priority. As Amber was wheeled away, Victoria sat up on her own gurney and made her way to the phone at the nurse's station. Her hands shook slightly as she dialed numbers from memory. Tom Bradley's phone came the familiar voice of Richard's business partner. Tom, it's Victoria. Richard's in the hospital. St. Mary's in Manhattan. Heart attack. Jesus Christ. How bad. You need to call his parents and his brother. I'm going to be here for a while. Victoria, I'm so sorry. Do you need anything? Just make those calls. Tom, his family should be here. Victoria hung up and returned to Richard's bedside in the cardiac unit. He looked pale and fragile beneath the oxygen mask, connected to machines that monitored his heart rhythm and blood pressure. The man who had commanded boardrooms and negotiated million-dollar deals was reduced to beeping monitors and IV drips. She pulled a chair beside his bed and took his hand, noting how cold his fingers felt. Richard, she said softly. Can you hear me? His eyes fluttered open, unfocused but aware. He tried to speak around the oxygen mask, and Victoria leaned closer to hear him. Vic, his voice was barely a whisper. You came. Of course I came. I'm sorry, he said, his words slurred but distinct. I'm so sorry for everything. Victoria squeezed his hand. I know you are, but sorry doesn't fix this. Richard's eyes filled with tears. What happens now? Now you get better. Then we figure out how to move forward as divorced people who share a complicated history. The baby is going to be fine. Amber's going to be fine. I made sure of that. Richard stared at her with confusion and something that might have been gratitude. You chose to save them. I chose to save an innocent child and its mother, Victoria corrected. I chose to do what was right, regardless of what you've done to me. Dr. Martinez appeared beside the bed, looking tired but optimistic. Mr. Manning, you're a lucky man. We were able to clear the blockage without surgery. You're going to need significant lifestyle changes and cardiac rehabilitation, but you should make a full recovery." "And Amber?" Victoria asked. "Ms. Chen is stable. The head injury was minor, mostly a concussion. We were able to stop the premature labor. Both mother and baby are doing well." Richard closed his eyes. Whether from relief or exhaustion, Victoria couldn't tell. "Thank you," he whispered. Over the next several hours, the Manning family arrived in waves. Richard's parents, elderly and bewildered by the medical crisis. His younger brother, flying in from Chicago with questions about the business implications. Tom Bradley, bringing updates from the office and looking uncomfortable with the personal drama. Victoria found herself managing the family crisis the way she had managed Richard's business, entertaining for 2 decades, making sure everyone had coffee, coordinating with medical staff, handling the practical details that allowed others to focus on their emotions. "Victoria," Richard's mother said, pulling her aside in the family waiting area. "I don't understand what's happening. Richard said you two were having problems, but we're getting divorced." "Ellen," Victoria said gently, "Richard has been having an affair. The woman he's involved with is also in the hospital tonight." Ellen Manning looked stricken. "I don't understand. You two seem so happy." "We were happy for a long time, but people change. Situations change." Victoria took the older woman's hand. "Richard is going to be fine. He's going to recover completely and live a good life. It's just not going to be the life we planned together." What about you? Dear, what will you do?" Victoria looked around the hospital waiting room at the family she had been part of for over 2 decades. Richard's parents, who had welcomed her as a daughter. His brother, who had been best man at their wedding. Tom Bradley, who had watched them build a business and a marriage simultaneously. "I'm going to be fine too," Victoria said. "Better than fine, actually. I'm going to remember who I was before I became Richard Manning's wife." As dawn broke over Manhattan, Victoria made her final visit to Amber's room in the maternity ward. The younger woman was awake, one hand resting protectively on her belly, the other connected to an IV drip. "How are you feeling?" Victoria asked. "Grateful," Amber said simply. "The doctor said if we had waited much longer, I might have lost the baby." "But you didn't lose the baby. That's what matters." Amber studied Victoria's face. "Why did you save me? Save us?" Victoria sat down in the visitor's chair and considered the question. "Because I've spent 24 years being Richard Manning's wife. Tonight, I got to be myself again. And myself doesn't let innocent people suffer because of someone else's mistakes." "What happens now with Richard, with the divorce, with everything?" "Now Richard recovers and learns how to be a father. Now you decide what kind of relationship you want with a man who kept you secret for 2 years. Now I figure out what the next chapter of my life looks like." Victoria stood up to leave, then paused at the door. "Amber, that baby is lucky to have you as a mother. Don't let Richard or anyone else convince you that you're not enough." As Victoria walked through the hospital corridor toward the exit, she passed the emergency room where she had made her choice 12 hours earlier. The overnight chaos had been replaced by the organized efficiency of day shifts, but she could still see the trauma bay where 2 gurneys had held the people she chose to save. She had chosen to save Richard's pregnant mistress instead of Richard himself. She had chosen compassion over revenge, future life over past betrayal, the needs of an innocent child over the claims of a 24-year marriage. Standing in the morning sunlight outside St. Mary's Hospital, Victoria Manning realized something that surprised her. She had never felt more proud of a decision in her entire life. 6 weeks later, Victoria stood in her own apartment for the first time in 24 years. The 1-bedroom space in a pre-war building on the Upper West Side was a dramatic change from the Westchester mansion she had shared with Richard. Hardwood floors instead of marble, a galley kitchen instead of a chef's paradise, windows that looked out at neighboring brownstones instead of manicured gardens. "It's small," Grace said, helping Victoria unpack boxes in the living room. "It's mine," Victoria replied, unwrapping a framed photograph of herself at law school graduation. She had found it buried in a closet at the mansion, forgotten beneath years of photos featuring Richard's business achievements. "Are you happy?" Grace asked, settling onto the second-hand sofa Victoria had purchased from a furniture consignment shop. "I'm becoming happy. There's a difference." Victoria arranged law books on a shelf she had assembled herself, taking pride in the simple domestic accomplishment. "I'm remembering what it feels like to make decisions based on what I want, not what someone else needs." The divorce proceedings had moved faster than expected. Richard, perhaps motivated by guilt over his heart attack or gratitude for Victoria's hospital choice, had agreed to a fair settlement without the legal warfare Sarah Peterson had predicted. Victoria received exactly half of their marital assets, $25 million, the Manhattan apartment, and her freedom. Richard had moved in with Amber after his release from the hospital, renting a penthouse apartment near his office where he could recover while preparing for fatherhood. According to Tom Bradley, who served as an unofficial liaison between the former spouses, Richard was taking cardiac rehabilitation seriously and had reduced his work schedule to prepare for the baby's arrival. "Have you heard from them?" Grace asked, correctly interpreting Victoria's thoughtful expression. "Amber sends updates occasionally. The baby is due in 6 weeks. They're engaged now, apparently." Victoria felt no jealousy at the news, only a mild curiosity about how Richard was handling his transition from secret affair to public commitment. "And how do you feel about that?" Victoria unpacked a box of kitchen items, arranging coffee mugs in her small cabinet. "I feel like they deserve each other, not in a cruel way, but in an honest way. They fell in love under false pretenses, but maybe they can build something real together now that the lies are over." The apartment was slowly taking shape, reflecting Victoria's rediscovered preferences rather than the compromises required by marriage. She had chosen furniture she liked, colors that appealed to her, art that spoke to her personally rather than fitting a decorator's vision of executive wife elegance. Her phone rang, and she recognized Sarah Peterson's number. "Victoria, how are you settling in?" Slowly but surely. "What's on your mind?" "Sarah, I have a proposition for you." Sarah's voice carried the excitement of someone with an interesting opportunity. "I've been thinking about our law school conversations, about how we wanted to change the world through legal advocacy." Victoria sat down at her small dining table, intrigued. "I'm listening." "I need a senior partner who specializes in high net worth divorce cases, someone who understands the emotional complexity of ending a long marriage, the financial implications of dividing substantial assets, and the importance of protecting women who may not realize their own legal rights." Victoria was quiet for a moment, processing the offer. "Sarah, I haven't practiced law in 20 years. Some things never leave you. You handled your own divorce with more grace and strategic thinking than most attorneys I know. You made decisions based on principle rather than emotion. You protected yourself financially while maintaining your ethical standards." Sarah paused. "I need someone like you representing other women going through the same experience." Victoria looked around her small apartment, thinking about the choice she faced. She could remain comfortably retired on her divorce settlement, perhaps travel or pursue hobbies, or find ways to fill the time that had previously been devoted to managing Richard's life, or she could return to the profession she had abandoned to support someone else's dreams. What would the position involve? Client consultation, case strategy, negotiation, and occasional courtroom work. You'd be working with women who are ending marriages to powerful men tech executives, Wall Street financiers, real estate developers, women who need lawyers who understand both the legal landscape and the personal journey of reclaiming their independence. Victoria thought about her own experience over the past 2 months. The discovery of Richard's betrayal, the shock of learning about Amber's pregnancy, the hospital choice that had revealed her own character to herself. She thought about all the women who might be facing similar situations without the benefit of her legal education or financial resources. Women who needed advocates who understood that divorce wasn't just about money, it was about rebuilding an identity after years of defining yourself through someone else's success. "When would you need an answer?" Victoria asked. "Take your time. But Victoria, you've already proven you can handle the most difficult aspects of this work. You've lived through it yourself and made choices that reflected your values even under extreme pressure. That's exactly what I need in a partner. After hanging up, Victoria walked to her apartment window and looked out at the bustling street below. Women of all ages hurried past on the sidewalk, young professionals heading to important meetings, mothers managing children and groceries, older women who had survived their own life transitions and emerged stronger. For 24 years, she had supported Richard's ambitions while putting her own career on hold. She had believed that his success was their success, that his achievements reflected well on both of them. Now she realized that she had been living someone else's dream while forgetting her own. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Mrs. Manning, this is Amber. I wanted you to know that we named the baby Emily Rose Manning. Emily Rose for new beginnings. Thank you for giving us both the chance to have new beginnings." Victoria smiled, remembering the choice she had made in the hospital that night. She had chosen to save Amber and the baby, not because she forgave Richard's betrayal, but because she chose to act according to her own values, regardless of how others had treated her. Now she faced another choice. She could remain comfortable and safe in her new apartment, living quietly on her substantial divorce settlement. Or she could return to the work that had once given her life meaning and purpose. Victoria looked at her reflection in the apartment window, seeing not Richard Manning's ex-wife, but the woman she had been before marriage changed her priorities. A woman who had graduated at the top of her law school class, who had chosen legal advocacy because she believed in justice and protecting people who needed strong representation. She was 52 years old, financially independent, and free to make decisions based on her own values and goals. For the first time in decades, she could choose a future that belonged entirely to her. Victoria picked up her phone to call Sarah Peterson. She was ready to practice law again. 1 year later, Victoria Manning Peterson stood in the same hospital where everything had changed. St. Mary's Hospital looked different in daylight, less dramatic than it had appeared during that crisis-filled night when she had chosen to save Amber and the baby over Richard's immediate needs. The emergency room buzzed with the usual activity of a Friday afternoon, but without the life-or-death urgency that had characterized her last visit. Victoria carried a small gift bag as she made her way to the maternity ward, her heels clicking confidently on the polished floors. She had worn her best suit, navy blue Armani, that projected success without ostentation for this visit she had been planning for weeks. The maternity ward was cheerful and bright, decorated with pastel colors and photographs of happy families. Victoria found room 312 and knocked gently on the door. "Come in," called a familiar voice. Amber Chen Manning sat in the hospital bed, looking tired but radiant as she held her newborn daughter. At 29, new motherhood suited her, bringing a peaceful confidence that had been missing during their previous encounters. Richard sat in the visitor's chair, looking older but healthier than Victoria remembered, his cardiac rehabilitation evident in his improved posture and color. "Victoria," Amber said, genuine surprise and pleasure in her voice. "I didn't expect to see you." "I wanted to meet her," Victoria said, approaching the bed slowly, "and to see how you're both doing." The baby was perfect, tiny and pink with a cap of dark hair and Richard's distinctive nose. She slept peacefully in her mother's arms, oblivious to the complicated family dynamics surrounding her birth. "Would you like to hold her?" Amber asked. Victoria set down her gift bag and carefully took the baby. Mary's. Emily Rose Manning weighed almost nothing, her small body warm and trusting in Victoria's arms. For a moment, the hospital room fell silent, except for the soft sounds of the baby's breathing. "She's beautiful," Victoria said, meaning it completely. "Thank you," Richard said quietly, "for everything, for the hospital, for the divorce settlement, for being gracious about all of this." Victoria looked at her ex-husband, noting the changes that fatherhood and recovery had brought to his appearance. He looked older, certainly, but also more settled, as if the responsibilities of parenthood had given him a focus that business success had never provided. "How are you as a father?" Victoria asked Amber. "He's trying," Amber replied, with a fond glance at Richard. He's different now. The heart attack changed him. He's home by 6 every evening, and he hasn't traveled for business since Emily was born. And how are you two together? We're figuring it out day by day, Amber said honestly. It's not easy, building a relationship while raising a baby, especially after everything that happened, but we're committed to making it work. Victoria looked down at baby Emily, thinking about the choice she had made exactly 1 year ago. She had chosen to save this child's life and her mother's health over her own husband's immediate medical needs. At the time, it had felt like a simple moral decision. Now, holding the healthy baby who existed because of that choice, Victoria understood the full weight of what she had done. I have something for you, Victoria said, handing Emily back to Amber and retrieving her gift bag. For Emily, inside was a small silver frame containing a photograph of Victoria at Emily's age, taken over 50 years ago in her parents' garden. The baby in the photo had the same dark hair and serious expression as the infant now sleeping in Amber's arms. I thought she might like to know what her honorary grandmother looked like as a baby, Victoria said. Amber's eyes filled with tears. Honorary grandmother. If that's all right with you, I know it's unconventional, but Emily is going to grow up with questions about her father's first marriage. I'd rather she know me as someone who cares about her welfare than as a source of family conflict. Richard looked stunned. Victoria, you don't have to. I'm not doing this for you, Richard. I'm doing it for her. Victoria touched the baby's tiny hand. Emily didn't choose the circumstances of her birth. She deserves to grow up surrounded by adults who put her needs first. Victoria settled into the second visitor's chair and looked around the hospital room. How long have you been here? Just overnight, Amber said. We should be going home this afternoon. And home is? The penthouse near Richard's office. We bought it last month. Amber's voice carried pride in the achievement. 3 bedrooms. Room for Emily to grow up. Victoria nodded approvingly. Good. Children need stability. They talked for another hour about practical matters, pediatrician recommendations, childcare options, financial planning for Emily's future. Victoria found herself slipping into an advisory role, sharing the wisdom she had accumulated during her law practice about protecting children's interests during complex family transitions. Victoria, Richard said as she prepared to leave, I want you to know that I'm grateful, not just for the hospital choice, but for how you've handled everything. You could have made this much harder for us. Victoria looked at her ex-husband holding his infant daughter and felt the final pieces of her anger settle into something like acceptance. I could have made it harder for myself too, but I chose not to. Hakun, what do you mean? I chose to act according to my own values. Regardless of how you had acted toward me, I chose to prioritize an innocent child's welfare over my own hurt feelings. I chose to rebuild my life instead of spending my energy on revenge. Victoria smiled. Those choices led me to where I am now, which is exactly where I want to be. As Victoria left the hospital, she reflected on the journey that had brought her full circle to St. Mary's maternity ward. 1 year ago, she had been Richard Manning's wife, defining herself through his achievements and measuring her worth by her ability to support his ambitions. Now she was Victoria Manning Peterson, senior partner in one of Manhattan's most respected divorce law firms. Her practice had grown rapidly, built on referrals from satisfied clients who appreciated working with an attorney who understood both the legal complexities and emotional realities of ending a long marriage. She specialized in representing women divorcing wealthy men, tech executives, Wall Street financiers, real estate developers, entrepreneurs who had built substantial assets during marriages that were ending for various reasons. Victoria's clients appreciated her combination of legal expertise and personal experience, her ability to advocate aggressively while maintaining ethical standards. The work was challenging and emotionally demanding, but also deeply satisfying. Victoria had rediscovered the sense of purpose that had originally drawn her to law school, the belief that good legal advocacy could protect vulnerable people and ensure fair outcomes even in difficult circumstances. Her personal life had also evolved in unexpected directions. She was dating David Chen, no relation to Amber, a literature professor at Columbia who appreciated both her intelligence and her independence. They had met at a bookstore reading, bonded over their shared love of legal thrillers, and developed a relationship based on mutual respect and genuine compatibility. David was different from Richard in every important way. He supported Victoria's career ambitions, took pride in her professional achievements, and never expected her to subordinate her goals to his convenience. At 53, Victoria was learning what it felt like to be in a partnership between equals. As she walked through the hospital lobby, Victoria passed the emergency room where she had made the choice that changed everything. She could see the trauma bay where Richard and Amber had lain on gurneys, both needing immediate medical attention. While she decided who would receive priority care, the choice had seemed impossible at the time, save her husband or save his pregnant mistress. But looking back, Victoria realized it hadn't been impossible at all. It had been a test of character, an opportunity to demonstrate who she really was when stripped of all social expectations and emotional complications. She had chosen to save an innocent child and its mother. She had chosen compassion over revenge, future over past, the vulnerable over the powerful. Those choices had revealed her true nature to herself and set the foundation for everything that followed. Victoria stepped out of the hospital into the afternoon sunlight, her heels clicking confidently on the sidewalk. She had a client meeting in an hour, a woman married to a hedge fund manager who was trying to hide assets in offshore accounts. Victoria would help her client navigate the divorce process with dignity while ensuring she received fair compensation for 30 years of marriage. The work was important, helping women reclaim their independence and financial security after years of defining themselves through their husband's success. Victoria understood their situation intimately. Having lived through her own transformation from corporate wife to independent professional, her phone buzzed with a text from David. "Dinner at 8, I'm making that pasta you like." Victoria smiled as she typed her response. "Perfect. I have good news to share about the Patterson case." At 53 years old, Victoria Manning Peterson was exactly who she wanted to be. She was financially independent, professionally successful, personally fulfilled, and surrounded by people who valued her for herself rather than her ability to support their ambitions. She had learned that love wasn't about ownership or sacrifice, but about mutual respect and genuine partnership. She had discovered that happiness didn't require someone else's approval, but came from living according to her own values and pursuing goals that gave her life meaning. As she walked toward her office, Victoria thought about the choice that had started everything: the decision to save Amber and Emily Rose Manning instead of prioritizing Richard's immediate medical needs. At the time, it had felt like the hardest choice of her life. Now she realized it had been the easiest choice she had ever made. When faced with a moment that would define her character, she had chosen to be the person she wanted to be. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you turns out to be the best thing that could have happened. Sometimes you have to lose everything you thought you wanted to discover what you actually need. Sometimes the most important choice isn't between two people, but between two versions of yourself. Victoria Manning Peterson had chosen wisely, and she was living with the beautiful consequences of that choice every single day.